The hidden truth about the top 1%. There's a narrative that the top 1% are somehow different, smarter, more talented, more connected. But when you really break it down, that story falls apart. What separates them isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, decision by decision, day by day. The uncomfortable truth is that most people never get close, not because they can't, but because they never operate in a way that would make it possible. They stay busy, they stay hopeful, but they never become intentional. And intention is where everything starts to shift. The top 1% don't just work harder. That's the surface level explanation people use to feel better about staying where they are. What they actually do is operate differently. They think differently. They make decisions through a completely different lens. While most people are reacting to life, they are designing it. While most people are chasing outcomes, they are building systems that produce outcomes automatically. And that gap between reacting and designing is where separation begins. What makes this even more important is how invisible this difference is. From the outside, it might look like luck or timing, but underneath, it's structure, it's discipline, it's clarity. It's the ability to do things that don't feel exciting in the moment but create exponential results over time. And if you don't understand that, you'll keep chasing shortcuts that never actually lead anywhere meaningful. Why most people stay stuck without realizing it. Most people don't fail loudly. They fail quietly. They stay in motion, but they don't move forward. They consume more content, gather more ideas, and convince themselves that they're making progress. But in reality, they're stuck in a loop that feels productive but produces nothing. And the reason is simple. They don't have a framework for how progress actually works. They're guessing, hoping something clicks, instead of operating with precision. There's also a comfort in staying where you are, even if you don't like it. Because growth requires uncertainty. It requires making decisions without guarantees. It requires stepping into versions of yourself that don't feel natural yet. And most people avoid that. They stay in familiar patterns because it feels safer, even if it's limiting. That's why years can pass without real change, even when effort is being made. Another layer to this is distraction. Not just external distraction, but internal distraction. Constant switching between goals, ideas, and strategies. Every time you reset your focus, you reset your progress. And over time, that creates fragmentation. You never go deep enough in one direction to actually see results. And without depth, there is no separation. Without separation, there is no path to the top 1%. Strategy 1. Radical clarity over constant motion. Most people think progress comes from doing more tasks, more ideas, more effort. But the reality is, progress comes from doing the right things repeatedly. And you can't do the right things if you're not clear on what actually matters. Clarity is not just knowing what you want, it's knowing what to ignore. It's knowing what deserves your attention and what doesn't. And that level of clarity is rare. Without clarity, everything feels important. Every opportunity looks appealing. Every idea feels worth chasing. But that's exactly what keeps people scattered. The top 1% operate differently. They narrow their focus aggressively. They define what winning looks like for them in specific terms. And once that's defined, they align their actions around it with precision. There's no guessing. There's no constant pivoting. Clarity also reduces decision fatigue. When you know what matters, you stop wasting energy on things that don't move you forward. Your actions become more efficient, more intentional, and more consistent. And consistency, when applied to the right direction, compounds faster than most people realize. That's how small actions start producing big results. Strategy 2. Obsession with skill, not just information. We live in a time where information is everywhere. You can learn almost anything instantly. But access to information doesn't equal progress. In fact, for most people, it creates the illusion of progress. They feel like they're improving because they're learning more, but they're not actually applying anything. And without application, information has no value. The top 1% understand this at a deep level. They don't just consume information, they convert it into skill. And skill only comes from repetition, feedback, and refinement. It comes from doing the work, seeing what doesn't work, and adjusting. Over and over again. That process isn't glamorous. It's slow, sometimes frustrating, and often uncomfortable, but it's the only thing that creates real leverage. What makes skill so powerful is that it compounds. Once you build it, it stays with you. It becomes an asset you can use across different opportunities. and over time, that asset becomes your advantage. While others are still trying to figure things out, you're executing at a higher level. Not because you know more, but because you've practiced more. Strategy 3. Controlling your environment relentlessly. Your environment is shaping you more than you realize. The people around you, the content you consume, the spaces you spend time in, all of it influences your thinking, your behavior, and your standards. And if your environment isn't aligned with where you want to go, it will quietly pull you in the opposite direction. That's why willpower alone is never enough. The top 1% don't rely on motivation. They design environments that make the right actions easier and the wrong actions harder. They remove distractions. They limit exposure to things that dilute their focus. They intentionally place themselves in spaces where growth is the norm, not the exception. And over time, that environment starts doing part of the work for them. This is where most people underestimate the game. They try to change their results without changing their surroundings. But your environment either accelerates you or slows you down. There's no neutral. And once you understand that, you start making different decisions about what you allow into your space, your time, and your attention. Strategy 4. Doing what feels hard consistently. There's a moment in every growth journey where things stop feeling exciting and start feeling heavy. The novelty wears off, the results aren't immediate, and the work begins to feel repetitive. This is the exact point where most people slow down or quit. Not because they don't want success, but because they've been conditioned to follow what feels good instead of what actually works. And that conditioning keeps them average. The top 1% operate with a different rule. They don't ask, what do I feel like doing today? They ask, what moves me forward, even if it's uncomfortable? That one shift changes everything, because the actions that feel hard are usually the ones that create growth. They require focus, discipline, and effort, and most people avoid them, which is exactly why they work. Consistency and hard actions create separation faster than anything else. Not because the actions are magical, but because so few people are willing to repeat them long enough to see results. Over time, what once felt difficult becomes normal. And once it becomes normal, your baseline changes. You're no longer operating where most people are. You've moved into a different standard. Strategy 5. Thinking in long-term feedback loops. Most people make decisions based on what feels good right now. Immediate rewards, quick validation, short-term wins. But that mindset traps you in cycles that don't lead anywhere meaningful. Because what feels good in the moment often comes at the cost of long-term growth. And if you keep choosing short-term comfort, you keep delaying real progress. The top 1% think differently. They zoom out. They make decisions based on where those decisions will lead, not how they feel right now. They understand that every action creates a feedback loop. Something you do today will either move you closer to your goals or further away, even if the impact isn't visible immediately. And over time, those small decisions stack. What makes this powerful is that it removes emotional decision-making. You're no longer reacting to how you feel in the moment. You're operating from a system. You start asking better questions. If I repeat this behavior for the next 6 months, where does it lead? That level of thinking creates clarity, and clarity leads to better choices. Better choices lead to better outcomes. Becoming unreasonably accountable. Accountability is one of the most misunderstood concepts when it comes to growth. Most people think it means being responsible for your actions, but real accountability goes deeper than that. It means removing every excuse, every external blame, every reason that keeps you from taking ownership. It means deciding that your results are your responsibility, no matter the circumstances. This doesn't mean everything is your fault. It means everything is your responsibility to respond to. And that mindset is what gives you power. Because the moment you blame something outside of you, you give up control. You make yourself dependent on things you can't change. But when you take full accountability, you bring the focus back to what you can control. The top 1% don't waste time explaining why something didn't work. They adjust. They refine. They move forward. That level of ownership creates speed. While others are stuck in analysis or frustration, they're already making progress. And over time, that difference in speed becomes a massive advantage. Building identity. Before results. Most people try to change their results without changing who they are. They set goals, create plans, and take action. But underneath it all, their identity stays the same. And eventually, that identity pulls them back to their old patterns. Because your actions will always align with who you believe you are, not just what you want. The top 1% understand that identity drives behavior. Instead of focusing only on outcomes, they focus on becoming the type of person who produces those outcomes naturally. They build habits, standards, and beliefs that align with where they want to go, and over time, their results become a reflection of that identity. This is why temporary motivation doesn't last. You can push yourself for a while, but if it's not aligned with your identity, it won't stick. Real change happens when your actions feel consistent with who you are becoming, when discipline feels normal, when growth feels expected. That's when progress stops feeling forced and starts becoming automatic. Creating instead of consuming. We are living in a world designed for consumption. Endless content, constant stimulation, always something new to watch, read, or scroll through. And while consumption can be useful, most people take it too far. They spend more time absorbing information than applying it, and over time that creates passivity instead of progress. The top 1% flip this ratio. They focus on creation. They take what they learn and turn it into something. Content, ideas, systems, solutions, because creation forces clarity. It forces you to think, to organize your thoughts, to execute, and that process is where real growth happens, not in watching, but in doing. Creation also builds visibility and opportunity. When you put something out into the world, you create a signal. You give people a reason to notice you, to engage with you, to connect with you, and over time, those signals compound. What starts as small output can turn into leverage, influence, and income, but it only happens if you move from consuming to creating. The compounding effect of these strategies. Individually, each of these strategies is powerful, but the real transformation doesn't come from applying one or two of them occasionally. It comes from stacking them consistently over time. That's where compounding begins, and compounding is what separates temporary progress from exponential growth. When you combine clarity with consistent hard actions, you stop wasting energy and start building momentum. When you pair skill development with creation, you don't just improve, you produce visible results. When accountability meets long-term thinking, your decisions become sharper, more intentional, and more aligned with where you're going. These strategies don't operate in isolation. They reinforce each other. This is why the top 1% often looks like they're moving faster than everyone else. It's not because they're doing more in a single moment. It's because they've been doing the right things repeatedly long enough for the results to start stacking, and once that stacking begins, it accelerates. What once took months starts happening in weeks. What once felt difficult starts feeling automatic. Most people never experience this because they interrupt their own momentum. They start, stop, switch directions, lose focus, and reset the process over and over again. But when you stay consistent with the right strategies, you build something most people never reach. Predictability. You start to trust that your actions will produce results, and that trust changes how you show up every day. How the top 1% builds momentum. Momentum isn't something you wait for, it's something you create, and it's built through small, consistent actions that align with a clear direction. The top 1% don't rely on motivation to get started. They rely on systems that keep them moving, even when they don't feel like it. And over time, those systems remove friction. One of the key differences is how they handle progress. They don't expect instant results, but they do expect movement. They track what matters. They pay attention to feedback, and they adjust quickly when something isn't working. That ability to stay engaged with the process without becoming emotional about the outcome allows them to keep moving forward while others get stuck. They also protect their momentum aggressively. They don't allow unnecessary distractions to pull them off track. They don't constantly restart or chase every new idea. They understand that momentum is fragile in the beginning, but powerful once it builds. And because of that, they treat their focus like an asset, not something to spend carelessly. Over time, momentum becomes their advantage. It carries them through difficult phases. It reduces the effort required to take action, and it creates a sense of progress that fuels even more action. That cycle, once established, is hard to break, and that's exactly why it leads to the top 1%. At the end of the day, becoming part of the top 1% isn't about doing something extraordinary once. It's about doing ordinary things with extraordinary consistency and intention. It's about choosing clarity when confusion is easier, choosing discipline when comfort is available, choosing long-term growth when short-term rewards are tempting. The shift is subtle, but powerful. You stop asking, what's the easiest way to get results? And start asking, What's the most effective way to build something that lasts? That question alone changes how you approach everything. Your time, your energy, your decisions, your standards. And once your standards change, your results follow. There's no single moment where everything clicks, no instant transformation that takes you from where you are to where you want to be. Instead, it's a series of decisions. Small, often unnoticed, but deeply impactful. And over time, those decisions reshape your identity, your habits, and your outcomes. Most people will read or hear ideas like this and move on. They'll agree with it, maybe even feel motivated by it, but they won't apply it consistently enough for it to matter. And that's the difference. Not knowledge, not potential. Execution. Sustained, focused, intentional execution. So the real question isn't whether these strategies work. They do. The real question is whether you're willing to apply them long enough to see the results. Because if you are, the path to the top 1% isn't hidden. It's built, step by step, through the way you choose to operate every single day.